So the United States has found itself in a very delicate and difficult position. How do you juggle that, conflict? And then we've seen that Turks have made kind of aggressive. Um, their posturing towards Israel has become aggressive and borderline hostile. And this has been taken extremely seriously by the Israeli leadership, who now have upgraded Turkey into their biggest and most dangerous enemy rather than Iran. The Iran has been relegated to the second place. And at the same time, the Houthis and Hamas continue to pound Israel. So they didn't, 6 weeks ago, I said I thought that Israel scored a very Pyrrhic victory there. It looks nice in the same way that the United States walking into Kabul in 2002 looked nice, and them walking into Baghdad in 2003 looked nice. Well, 20 years later, it doesn't look so nice anymore. It was a very, very costly triumph that led to a strategic defeat ultimately, and I think that this is exactly what Israel scored here. And with regards to the Western powers like the United States, the UK, and various members of the European Union like France and Germany, other countries have less involvement. They're going to score a strategic defeat there. And I think that what that's going to mean concretely, and this is important to understand, is it's not going to be that you're not going to have oil at the pumps anymore, because oil gets to your pumps one way or another. If there's demand, you're gonna get the oil. Maybe it's going to be a question of price, but the oil supply can go on. The problem is that I think that the Western financial system implodes. Why? Because they no longer control the collateral. The resource wealth of these various parts of the world have to be controlled by force because they are, in large part, they're the collateral of the Western financial system. It's on the basis of that collateral that they issued hundreds of billions of loans to the likes of BP, Royal Dutch Shell, Halliburton, KBR, you name it, thousands of corporations. And it's based on the business that they have in the region that they are repaying those loans, right? So those assets, which have been extremely lucrative and profitable for the Western financial industry, are now slipping away. And so you're going to be getting more and more bad debts. And the only way you can backstop that is by printing currency at this point, or letting all those companies and banks go bust, which is not what they're going to allow happen. So they're going to have to be printing currency ad infinitum. And I think that the results for the Western powers is going to be, in the case of Europe, Britain, Japan, it's going to be stagflation for years, which will very likely accelerate into a hyperinflation. So inflation is going to be accelerating. And then with respect to the United States, I think that the United States has a much, much greater maneuvering space. So inflation is going to be inevitable. But in the case of the United States, maybe it won't be stagflation. Maybe the United States will muster some good economic growth because it can. It can attract a lot of capital back home. It can restart industrialization. It can use a lot of this capital to renovate its stock of infrastructure. It's infrastructure stock. The bridges are falling down, the railroads are falling down, you name it. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of capital with which that work can be done. And so I think with the Trump administration that there's a good chance that they're going to ramp up the economic machine that is going to hum along. That's not going to save the dollar, but if people are working and the economy is producing goods and services, people are okay. Everybody's savings are going to go to zero or close to, But there's going to be work, there's going to be bread, there's going to be food, and there's going to be stuff in the stores. In Europe, I think we're going to see a much more serious crisis, much more serious crisis with not only inflation but also a recession at the same time.
Wow. So you haven't disappointed.
Yeah,
Because
sorry, that was long, but you asked, so
no, you didn't disappoint by all means. But I mean, I was writing notes furiously, some questions and some observations that you can elaborate on. My first question, and if I could get three questions in here,
sure.
is what's the next? Do you see, and this is very, very hard to predict. I get that. And this is not a prediction, but what do you see as the next shoe to drop then, a la Syria in the Middle East, or if there is a next shoe to drop? The second question is you've seen since we've last talked, well, in December, all this happens simultaneously. It seemed like Germany basically imploded. Is that, and how is that related? And you touched on that in what you just said about really the Western financial markets, if you wouldn't paraphrase, seizing and imploding. So it seems to me that that is related. And then the third, more of it is a question, but it's also an observation. Do you see money? You talked about the US. Do you see potential money flowing back to the US because relative strength versus the rest of the world and relative stability, if that makes sense?
Okay, so going back to the next shoe to drop, there's been a lot of talk that the next shoe to drop would be Iran because, people kind of extrapolated that whole Wesley Clark prediction of we're going to take down 7 nations in 5 years. He made that prediction 20 years ago, so it hasn't been exactly correct, even though out of those 7 nations, 6 have been taken down. So people say, like, well, this is an unstoppable force, and the only country on that list that hasn't been taken down is Iran. So therefore, Iran's going to be the next shoe to drop. But the strategic situation in the region has changed, and it's changed irreversibly, and it's changed radically in the sense that United States had two levers of power in that region. One was reliance on its allies, which were many, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, less minus Iran, and Turkey. All of these alliances are either no longer or they're very, very wobbly, with exception of Israel. Um, Jordan and Egypt may be solid, but those regimes themselves are extremely wobbly. So that lever of power is turned into a wet noodle. And then the other lever of power was what they call the force projection, which means, you would, if there was some uppity regime in the region or anywhere in the world who thought that they could defy the empire, well, the United States would just send one of their carrier strike groups, and that would generally intimidate um, other nations into complying with the diktats of the empire. Well, meanwhile, we have these hypersonic missiles, which are now, it's not only Russia that has them, but Iranians have them. And apparently, Ansar Allah in Yemen also has them. And these missiles are capable of destroying carrier strike groups, or at the very least, debilitating them to the point where they are useless. So that lever of power has also turned into a wet noodle. And then, this beachhead in the Middle East named Israel uh, hasn't got a snowball's chance in hell of surviving without the financial and military support from the United States. And now we know that the United States is a paper tiger.